Oftentimes, we're too busy doing the job that we have in front of us because we're committed, we're conscientious, we're driven, and actually taking the time to step back and go, is this for me?
The steps you take when following your career compass just start from paying attention to ourselves and not being on autopilot. That is so easy to do because sometimes you feel like a job is something that you applied for on day one and the rest just happens to you. And I think that for me is the risk that's not worth it.
It's so good to have you here in this capacity. And as we were designing this, I know for Flick, you're used to being on this side, but instead we're going to be picking your brain. And the first thing I wanted to ask you about was really in the context of high performance, right? You have grown in this organization, which suggests to me that you're performing at a high level. We're going to be talking about your topic today, which is following your career compass. And I just want to sort of set the table for this. And I just want to know, how does following your career compass fit into the conversations with high performer piece?
I think one of the things that's always interesting when I talk to people when they meet me either now or have known me is they kind of ask me questions about my career at TravelPerk and my career journey. And I don't know, the word career, it feels a bit fake sometimes. I'm like, it feels so deliberate. Like I woke up and was like, this is my career growth that I want to go on. When actually it was just kind of like, I have a job in front of me and I want to do it well and I want to be interested in the things that I'm doing. But I think trying to come up with a name, something like, navigating your Wednesday at work and trying not to hate it too much didn't really have the same ring as navigating your career compass. So I think, today is really talking about how to show up in the work that you do, be interested in what you're doing, make sure it keeps you interested as well, and trying to make the right choices as you go along so that when you look back, you're like, oh, look, there's a career path. You might not feel it in the moment, spoiler alert, but you'll look back at some point and either your LinkedIn will show you or other people will tell you that you've had a great career journey and you're like, oh, nice.
I love the concept of this theme of following your career compass. And the reason I like it, Flick, is that even though, as you say, you look back and it hasn't been intentional, you've kind of built this compass sort of retrospectively. You've kind of went, what are the things that have guided you? And so I'm really, really excited to get into Flick's first point around following your career compass, which is all around identifying your superpowers.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, even though I say it's not intentional, I think intentionality is in the next step. Like I know I want to take a next step. And usually there's like a moment of frustration that you're like, oh, I really want to be doing something else, or I want to get another role or to be trying some new challenges. And so even if the end goal, because I can definitely tell you that 6.5 years ago, I did not expect to be leading the people team. You kind of have some moments that feel intentional. And I think it started with me of like figuring out what it is that I'm good at or what it is that people come to me for. And that's really where the superpower starts off. I often say to people that I see us all as like Pokemon cards. And if you flip it over, you've got like a set of skills that you're ranked on in various levels. And the problem is our Pokemon cards don't exist. So we have to figure it out ourselves. And I think it's important to do that because otherwise it's hard to know where you should dial up, where you should say yes to challenges if you don't know that you're really good at asking questions, or you don't know that people come to you when they're looking for advice because you're really clear at, cutting through the crap and just getting to the crux of the problem. And often superpowers can be so generic. They're like, yeah, you're a good public speaker. It's like, good public speaker, or is it that you always nail 3 points and tell a good story that helps everyone leave the room connected? Like, you want to go specific enough that you can practice it and do it over and over again.
Yeah. I love the idea in the Pokemon cards that it's, you have this skill set and really that you can identify your superpowers. What was kind of the first superpower that you got specific on, that you identified early in your career and you thought, I'm going to double down on this because I've been told I'm good at it, feel like I'm enjoying it? Like what came first for you?
I think probably when I asked my friends why they come to me and they told me, oh, it's because you're really pragmatic. But some of them just said you're kind of a nihilist, that you just like, you assume that everything matters and nothing matters at once. And so you'll just come up with something. You're like, oh, that's really the crux of it. And I was like, oh, do I? I don't know. I think I just don't want to text that long. And so I just kind of keep the answers short. But then from there, I was like, oh, okay. So how can I really use that in certain places? And when I became a people manager, that was probably the first place that I could kind of see someone in a one-to-one, they'd raise a problem and they'd kind of share it. And at the end, you're like, okay, so I'm hearing 2 or 3 real things here. And then the other things that seem to be like extrapolating fears from that. But how do we really tackle the core? And then from there, that really led me on to the next one, which was asking good questions, which is a skill that I'm always working on. And I steal questions from good people that ask good questions. So I'm taking some from you today, I'm sure.
Yeah. No, the question one's amazing. And I love that. I love that you identifying your superpowers. You mentioned the friends. I want to get into that in a moment. But one of the other ideas that I know you've shared with me before is you like this concept of post-it wins. Can you share a little bit about what that is and how folks can use that?
Yeah, for sure. So whenever you're working in something or you're kind of just in the flow of the work you do, it's really, and this is a really good thing before a performance review, months before, I would say, start writing down on a post-it note the moments in the day that either you love or that you were really energized or that people celebrated you for. Just write them down, like just literally a post-it note. You might not even remember the first couple of ones, you'll forget, but then every so often you'll start to just collect a list. And then when you look back at them, you're like, there's a theme around this. There's a part of my day that I enjoy the most, or there's a part of my day that I'm lost in time and I don't even know it. And it might not be the 100% of your job, but it's definitely something that if you look at your post-it note of wins and it's a theme on there, you may want to start thinking about how to dial up doing that more and more and more. And it's also half the work of your performance review because then all of your wins are already documented for you.
2 birds, 1 stone.
Exactly.
The last part of this identifying superpowers that you share with us, Flick, was around imagine your ideal. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So when you've got what you enjoy from your post-it notes and then you've got from your friends what you're good at, and then you've thought, oh, that's actually a thing. I just thought I just did that and that wasn't that special. Especially if you're at a point where you're like, okay, I'm doing the job I'm doing and I'm happy enough, but I want to go to the next step. Using those 2 components of what am I good at and what do I enjoy is a great way to start imagining the ideal day that you would have. There was a point for me, probably around like 2020, I'd say, when I started to think about, okay, I've been a people manager now for about a year and the things I love, and I've asked my friends and there's things that they've told me that I'm good at. What would my ideal day be? And I kind of just like sounded it out. We didn't have ChatGPT then, so I could have put it into ChatGPT and said like, create a career for me. But it was something along the lines of like half my day just like coaching people, asking in one-to-ones, asking questions, getting to know them. Half the day in Excel spreadsheets. I was like, what job is that? Where I get to kind of do some numbers because I enjoy just tackling and tinkering with things, but also get to talk to humans all day. And so that kind of then started off this journey of like, okay, so there's bits of the day that you experience now, but not that much. That tells me that the pieces of my day that I love is when I'm being a people manager and when I'm kind of helping somebody through something. Because then I kind of went further. I was like, it's not just the time that I spend in Excel, but it's when someone says like, hey, I've never used Excel before. And I'm like, let's go and do some formulas together. And it was actually teaching somebody that I enjoyed more and more. And so kind of exploring that was just like, okay, there's something in this that's about, I'd say, 40 to 60% of what I am doing right now. But I need to do something to get that to be my full day. And at some point, kind of exploring that. And the next thing I did was just find ways to do that, right? Like I ran sessions literally on Excel course for people who use it for commercial roles, getting people's feedback, dipping your toe in, kind of learning from there. And at some point, it made me realize, I think the commercial team's not for me anymore. And I think that the people side of things, where I get to do more of the coaching, more of the asking questions, and more of the teaching, may be the way to go. But it started off with just imagining, no like job titles, just describe your ideal day and then work from there to see how you can make that a little bit more and more of your reality.
Yeah. And that stepping back, that imagining your ideal, I think oftentimes high performers, you're too busy doing the thing, right? We're too busy doing the job that we have in front of us because we're committed, we're conscientious, we're driven, and actually taking the time to step back and go, is this for me? And that's why I love this sort of message that you're sharing is like, you know, what's the ideal? And conversely, what's the stuff that you go, oh my God, I can't do another year of this. And that can help inform the next step. And so I think that's a really nice jumping off point because, once we've identified our superpowers, Flick, then it's really about how do we grow? So let's get into your point number 2, which is all around practical growth.
Yeah. So the reason I started thinking about practical growth is I'm quite a practical person. I struggle to spend too long in the hypothetical before I'm like, okay, yeah, that's the idea, but what are we going to do? You can jump into solution mode, which was also one of the things my friend texted me, like, you will find a solution, you don't stay too long in the problem. Good and sometimes bad, but it was important for me to think about, like, okay, well, practically, what do you do then? How do you get out of this? And I think that was for me one of the things that was intentional in my career, for sure, because growing sometimes feels like this thing that happens to other people. They're like, oh, that person's growing. And again, you look back and you're like, oh, I grew, but you don't really know how to do it in the moment. Like, what do I do about it? And so for me, it starts off with kind of like taking the first action. And the first action for me was deciding I wanted to learn something. And I don't think I will ever go back to school. I actually don't know how I managed to get a degree. And like, I sat there week in, week out. I'm so impatient. I can't believe I went to school and studied that. But as an adult, I'm like, oh, I do like learning, but I just don't know if I could do it all day long. And so I started thinking about, like, okay, how can I bring a little bit of learning into my day to day? And it started off by, what would I like to learn?
I love that. So it's the like to learn. And, one thing that I don't want to forget calling out that I was reflecting on, and I haven't asked you whether I can share this or not, but I'm going to anyway. Does that give you the fear? Probably, but you trust.
I'm like, it's fine.
I remember when Flick was obviously in this career change into the current role of VP of People. And what I loved about how practical you are, you were so thoughtful about not being totally emotional or totally rational. You were like, I'm going to try this thing out and I'm going to sit with it. First of all, I'm going to sit before I take the job. I'm going to think about Abby and think about relationships and how this is going to work. And am I going to be the right person for the role for TK? And you were so thoughtful about it. Like, it was scary because it was so well balanced. And I just wanted to call that out. It was one of the things that really struck me as incredibly professional, mature, thoughtful, considerate of like, will this work for me? Because I wonder, and I know you love your job, by the way, so no one worries, it's not going anywhere, but imagine, you hadn't have been able to enjoy it or it wasn't for you. That would have been interesting.
It would have been interesting, but I think I would have gone back to step one. Okay, well, what parts of it do I like? Because it just keeps going round and round. Like, what parts of it do I like? What parts of it do I wish I didn't have to do so much? If I could design my ideal part of this day, which parts of it might I not have? And then you just keep going from there. And I think it's your career journey, but it's also just kind of paying attention to yourself. Like, you don't just come to work and work happens to you. Like, you can actually just decide what are the things that are going on here in here and how would I like for this to shift. And I can't say that that's true in every single role I've had in every single company, but at TravelPerk, with so much going on, there's enough to dip your toe into different things and be like, okay, I'm kind of more interested in this than that and go down that path.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, significant growth for TK. So the other acronym that I had never heard of before you shared it with me ahead of today was CASE. And forgive my accent, CASE. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, so on my journey of practical growth, the first step is I'm going to learn something. And even just going back to that, when I decided to reach out to Tony and learn from him, I had to first check that I like learning in that way, because I'm not really a classroom style learner. I like to sit beside someone and observe what they do. But you might like learning differently. And if you're not sure how you like to learn, there's two things I would say. Firstly, when was the last time you learned something and what did you do? Did you go on YouTube? Did you async learn it? Did you ask a friend to teach you? And if you've never learned something recently, like myself, I hadn't studied for a while, then I'd ask you to try this way. Go and learn the guitar by the end of the year to play at the Christmas party. Are you going to go on YouTube? Are you going to go buy a guitar tomorrow? Are you going to go and ask a friend? Like, once you know how you like to learn, once you've thought about that, pick something you want to learn and then follow that path to do it, whether that is by sitting with somebody else who's an expert or by, reading a book on it, whatever it is. And so for me, when I discovered, all right, I'm a what I call an apprentice style learner. I like to sit next to the person and learn. Probably why I like Excel, because I sat next to JC for so long when the company was so small. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I can learn some things from there. But then the next thing that I do when I'm an apprentice style learner is copy and steal everything. And this one was one for me that I felt like took me a long time to realize it was okay to do. Like, if you see someone do a great presentation, a great Excel spreadsheet, I mean, how many times am I going to say Excel today? Let's see. A great tip when they're whatever it is, copy and steal it. Like, there's no reason that can't become your thing. Like, and I tell this a lot to my teams, like, if you like a presentation, if you like a way that someone opened the meeting, take it. It's yours. You're going to add it to your repertoire and you'll shape it the next time you use it, or you'll use it exactly the same way. It doesn't matter. It's a great way to go from creating presentations that are kind of like, to leveling up. Just take someone else's that was better than yours and go, okay, I really like what they did about this. I like the font that they use, or I like the colors that they use, or I like the way that they presented it, or I like the images that they use. Sometimes we tell ourselves that I have to grow to that point. It's like, yes, but you can grow to that point by taking that thing and letting it become part of your toolkit of things that you use. And so copying and stealing everything, I feel like we all need to be given the permission. So permission granted. Take the time to see something that you like someone do, that you admire of them. And it can be absolutely anything from, I love when people come on stage and they'll say something to warm up the room, like, it's me between you and the beers at the end of the session, and people kind of give a little laugh. I'm like, oh, that's a good one. I'm gonna use that in case I'm awkwardly starting off a session, knowing that I am the last one before everyone can go and get a beer. And so there's just whatever it is, just take it, use it, and add it to your repertoire.
So we've covered your first point around following your career compass, which was identify your superpowers. We talked about tips for practical growth, but your third point is around decision making. And I think this is really such a great build, right? Because we're starting to figure out who we are, what really makes us tick, how do we develop that further? And then, of course, one of the things that we're always doing in our careers is we're making decisions. And I find that to be the scary thing, because, sometimes we're making decisions intuitively. We're not really sure why, but it's really critical in following your career compass. What's directing you, what's steering you. So let's talk a little bit about this.
Yeah. So when you've had that day where you're like, I want to do something in my career, or I want to feel like I'm moving forward, and I've got an idea of what it could look like, and I've started to understand how I could move forward, it's kind of like there comes a point where you have to make a decision. And you touched on one decision that I had to make last year, which was deciding to step into this role. And it sometimes it's a new job that's come up, or it's a new opportunity that you want to push for, or I know that some people recently took a career move to go and try something out in the engineering department. And there comes a moment where you're like, do I do that thing, or do I stay where I am? And so I kind of developed this mental toolkit that I use that helps me decide, which you kind of touched on. And the first step of that is understanding what's driving me. And this one, I think, even bigger than deciding to move to the people team, this was a really big motivator for me when I decided to leave London and move to Barcelona for TravelPerk. And the first thing I needed to do is ask myself, do I want this opportunity, or do I want to escape from where I am? And that's two very different drivers, because I don't want to just run to something else and then be in the same position. And typically the way that I'd fall into that trap is because I haven't actually checked what I want to do yet. I haven't done the first step of like, what do I like? Where do I want to go? How do I learn something and try something, dip my toe in? I'm just like, oh, there's another job. It could be exactly the same problem there. And so what's actually forcing me to flee? Is it getting away from this thing, or is it something that I really like the look of? And so first thing is like identifying what's driving me.
So interesting. You talked about the psychology there of like threat reward.
Yeah.
Am I running to something? I'm excited to try this new opportunity, or I'm like, oh my God, get me out of this job, or get me out of this project, or get me out of this team, or I can't deal with this manager, all these different factors. Made me think of a time, I was just thinking about your career change and sort of evolving role. I remember I was moving from Dublin to Singapore. I'd never been to Asia before. I was so excited. I was moving to Singapore, but I had a couple of opportunities to move there in terms of do different roles. And I remember seeking out help from a kind of a more senior person in the organization. I was working for Google at the time and had a conversation with them, and I was so unaware of what was driving the decision. And I was very confused, very lost. And we got on a call for about 10 minutes. And she said to me, tell us about the two different opportunities. Tell us about the two roles. And all I did was talk to her for an hour for about 10 minutes. And she reflected back and said, do you realize your energy on that second role was way up? And for her, it was so obvious. And for me, it was like a black box, right? I couldn't see it. And so is that something you would advocate for in terms of like when you were deciding on both moving from London to here, which is a significant move, and then is that something you do typically? Have you got a couple of people you go to for this?
Very much. Once you understand kind of, you can ask yourself or you can ask others, describe it, list out what you're excited about. And then when you think you know, imagine that you've taken that step already. Kind of just imagine that you've closed off the other door and you're like, I'm doing this. And then describe your day. Suddenly you're like even more animated, because when you're stuck in that decision point moment, you sometimes can hedge your bets even when you're describing it. But if you were to say, you're taking the second job, now describe to me what your day could look like. All of a sudden you're like open. And that was exactly what happened to me. It was like, oh, well, if I'm living in Barcelona, then this could be my day, and then this could be my day, and I could do this. And so you realize that really what was holding you back from knowing that decision, that it was the right one for you, is just that paralyzed moment of should I, shouldn't I? And you list it out and you already really know what it is that you're energetic about.
So you're putting yourself in those shoes. That's one way to do it mentally, to check in with yourself. How does your body feel? How do you react? What do others hear you say? But one of your other points around your decision to making toolkit is around dipping the toe in. I'm so curious to hear about this because I can see you and Avi going, Avi, I'll just try this. I'll just try this VP of people thing just for a week.
Yeah. I think dipping your toe in is almost as controversial to me as copy and steal everything case. Because someone gave me permission again to do this. And this was something that I tried out when I was trying to decide whether I stay as the manager of a team or I jump to being head of the department when I was still in the commercial role. And what it actually entailed was going out and looking at what it's like for somebody who does that job today. And I was given this advice. You think you want to be head of account management. Why don't you go and see what head of account management looks like outside TravelPerk? The job doesn't exist here today, so you can't go and ask that person. And so I went on LinkedIn, I looked at the job descriptions of other companies, and I came back and I was like, okay, well, this is what's in there. This is what I think I could do today. This is what's different. And then I thought to myself, what would happen if I was to apply for another job at another company in head of account management? Am I good enough? What would I even like the idea of that? And so I thought, I mean, you've got some talent acquisition people in the room and you feel bad because you're like, I know I'm not going to take this job and I'm wasting someone's time. And so that's why it feels a bit almost controversial, but I did. I applied for 2 jobs, head of account management, just to see what is it out there? What do they ask me? What do they look for? And it was great firstly to get to the second stage, because you're like, all right, you know something, you can try this out. But actually to tell myself a different story than I'd been telling myself. Because up until that point, it was, that's too big of a leap. You've never done it before. No one would hire you in that role. And actually, like, you've got experience, you've got transferable skills, you've got knowledge of what the job is day to day, and you can extrapolate from that how you would lead others if you were in this position, and somebody validated it for you. Yes, there's a risk that we could lose some people, so please don't actually take the other job. But it was just a good way of, when you're really just like stuck in that imposter syndrome of there's no way I can get there, to try and dip your toe in when you don't have the ability to take someone for lunch and ask them about the job, or read the job description in your own role, in your own company, because it just doesn't exist. It was a good way of practicing and seeing what my life could look like, really.
I love that the VP of people at TravelPerk just said, apply for jobs outside of TravelPerk. I'm joking, but hear me out. Here's why I love that and love working with Flick, because that makes sense. We're all sitting here going, that makes sense, right? Because it actually, in my experience, it develops a few things. First and foremost, resilience. If you know that you have the capabilities and the desire in the market for others to say, I'm going to hire you and I'll take you into this organization, that creates resilience, right? It means that when you're a day job, you can go, this is okay. I'm choosing to be here. And that's the other thing, Flick, I think the way you describe it, because it gives confidence for you to go, this is where I want to be. And I've chosen to be here, rather than just kind of be an autopilot. because it's easy for a lot of folks to complain about being in a position, and sometimes people think the grass is greener, and actually it's not often. And it does remind me, when I eventually did go to Singapore, I was there 6 months and I hated it. I was like, what? This is an L&D program manager role. I should love it. This should be amazing. I hate it. I miss home. It's too hot. I'm sweating. But I was there for 6 months and I was starting to get really antsy. You get like, I just don't really like being here. But because, like many of you, and definitely you, I'm pretty competitive with myself and quite driven, and I didn't want to be a quitter and I didn't want to leave early, and that was the tension for me. And not dissimilar to what you've described as a really good part of your toolkit, I ended up speaking to my coach at the time and I said, I'm not having a great time here. It's not going well. My manager's not the best. Maybe I've made the wrong decision. I was really in a conflict. And you know what she said to me? All she said to me was, you can leave, right? And that alone reframed everything. And I went, that's right. I can leave, but I don't want to. I'm not ready yet.
Yeah.
Have you had experiences like that before? Confidence from others?
Oh, for sure. When you kind of get stuck in your own loop and you realize it's actually my complete choice on what's best for me. And that's when it's really important to just check that you're not running away from something, that you're actually excited about the next thing that you're doing. Because otherwise you could have just left and jumped into something else that was maybe in another less warmer country, but same problems, a manager that still didn't really challenge you because you didn't know that was the big thing. You want a great manager, you want it to feel like you're being led and you want to feel like you're being, really given opportunities. But if you didn't do the work, you could have just moved to the same problem, different toilet.
Yeah, exactly. Question we always ask on 3 Points podcast at the end, because we talk about different areas of expertise like you shared around following your career compass. No doubt that's important for, each of us individually as an organization at TravelPerk, and anyone else in the public listening to this is going, yeah, I'm bought in. My question to you, Flick, is how might the world change if we all followed our career compass?
Honestly, I think for me, the steps you take when following your career compass just start from paying attention to ourselves and not being on autopilot. That is so easy to do because sometimes you feel like a job is something that you applied for on day one and the rest just happens to you. And I mean, we're all here as high performers because we saw the job in front of us and we wanted to strive to do better at it. But that's not where it ends. You can decide that the job in front of you is something that you want to do really well at, but what else is in me? What else am I about? What else do I want to be about? And if you don't pause to reflect on where you show up well, how others see you well, what would be the thing that you love, you don't stop to decide that you want to learn something, practice something, you just kind of keep going on autopilot, or worse, waiting for an opportunity. You don't even realize you're waiting, just taking an opportunity that came by and not really being very happy with that one either. And I think that for me is the risk that's not worth it, because you spend a lot of time at work and it's fine that not every day is the happiest day ever. But when I look back at it, I want to be doing something that gives me joy or that I feel like I'm contributing to the benefit of other people in some way. And if you don't pay attention to yourself, you'll be taken on a ride that you didn't realize you were sitting on.
Oof. That's inspirational because if we don't, right? And it's the fear, isn't it? I love this pause and reflect and be intentional. I just want to give a big round of applause to Flick. Thank you so much for the insights.
Thank you.